Sausto.
Lasser. That's the other person.
Yes. Who's from Kaiser Permanente, and she's agreed to come in and talk to us about her specialty, which is dealing with anxiety. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say, and thank you so much for coming here.
Usually don't get class. I teach classes at Kaiser, and that's one of the things I do. I used to be a middle school teacher, actually, at one time. And then I was a high school teacher, middle school teacher. Got my license in Missouri and moved out to California, and they didn't have a licensed professional counselor degree. They do now. So the closest thing was an MFT, a marriage and family therapist. So I got that, but I don't do marriage and family therapy particularly. I do a little bit of it with people. But early on, I've been at Kaiser about 8 years in Sacramento. I started specializing in anxiety disorders, and I loved working with them so much. They're just so much fun to work with. It's so interesting to work with. People really get better when they learn how to manage their anxiety. It's really a pretty cool group of people to work with. But I decided I wanted to be the head of the program, which is called the Anxiety Champion, which my kids got a big kick out of. Because, anxiety is something I deal with too. I mean, almost everybody has a little bit of trouble with anxiety, and from my understanding, the main reason you guys are here is the public speaking piece. So I'm not going to really speak to that today. I'm just going to lay the groundwork, as Margaret asked me to do, about anxiety and how we treat it, and give you some strategies maybe to help you specifically, but also if we've got some other concerns around anxiety, then I'll educate you a little bit about that. I teach a 10-week class on anxiety, so I'm going to try to squeeze this into a very short amount of time. So I've got some information to give you, but I also do welcome any questions you have, because it helps me to remember to tell you things that I might have forgotten to put on the basic worksheet that I'm going to give you. So any questions up front? Anyone want to know up front? Yes.
Do you have any openings?
So are you in psychology? No. A little bit, but well, we do have openings for time to time. So just get the degree first. You have to have at least a master's.
I meant as a client, actually.
Oh, as a client. Oh my gosh. Yes. Do you know that when I started about 8 years ago at Kaiser, my anxiety classes were probably 1/4 the size they are now. I kid you not. Anxiety is like, talk about job security. It's really on the way off. The problems with anxiety for multiple reasons are a big problem with people. And it seems to be rising for, like we can talk about that the whole time, but we won't. But because of that, the anxiety treatment has gotten more. It used to be that depression got the most. Let me give one to you too also. Got the most attention, and it really still does get the most attention. Let me give you one of these also. But we are starting to see that more and more attention is being paid to anxiety, and the price that we pay for it, and the price that we pay for it physically as well as mentally, and the price that society pays for it as well. So we're starting to really focus more on it, and we're doing a lot of not only what we've been doing, but we're doing new things, and it's constantly evolving what we're doing with anxiety and anxiety treatment. So what I used to do, this is for you. What I used to do is I used to give what we call an anxiety overview initially, and that's what at Kaiser, anybody who's got any interest in anxiety management will come to this free overview. And then from there they go into classes that really teach the skills of how to manage anxiety better, depending on what kind of anxiety problem they have. They start in that particular overview. So that's pretty much what I'm going to do for you today, is just give you an overview of anxiety in general and anxiety specifically and how it relates to, hopefully to you. So please ask questions if you have them. So starting from the very beginning, what is anxiety? How would you define it? Everybody knows what it is, but how would you define it?
The uncomfort state that we feel when basically there is an uncomfort state that
It's
we go
uncomfortable.
ahead. Uncomfortable, and it's kind of hindering to do what we want to do in a correct way, and we feel that that's something that could hold it back.
Okay, it can hold you back. What else do we know about anxiety? Be uncomfortable,
Be nervous?
makes you nervous. So what is nervous? What does that mean?
I feel that it's defined as a fear that's there with or without the stimulus. So it's like, if you're afraid of something, you're afraid of something that is going to happen or is happening. If you're anxious about something, you can be anxious about it, or about the potential of it, or about the fact that you just did it. So it's kind of, it's not as tightly related to a stimulus.
It may not be. Fear is really in your face. You know, there's a bear coming out of the woods, kind of a thing, right? And anxiety is more, what we consider anxiety is more of a low-level series of symptoms, feelings, and actions, and thoughts. And the way we treat it, of course, and the way we manage it better is to deal with all of those different areas. So that's one of the things I'm going to talk about today. And it is uncomfortable if you aren't paying for it, because think about anxiety can be part of, I mean, excitement and anxiety are kind of the same, right? You're kind of anxious maybe on a roller coaster or skiing or anything like that, but yet you like that kind. But the kind we don't like is the ones that we're going to try to manage better. So you don't ever get rid of anxiety. Anxiety is part of being a human being. Anxiety is in every single human being. But some people have too much anxiety, and sometimes it's across the board, and sometimes it's in specific circumstances. Now, public speaking particularly is something that causes high anxiety with most people, because a very small portion of the population are extroverts, true extroverts. And so most of us, including me, have some level of introversion, which means that it's kind of hard to do public speaking. I don't want to steal the thunder from the guy coming next week, but you know, Jerry Seinfeld has, if you know who he is, he has a joke that most people would rather be in the coffin than give a eulogy. And it's one of the highest reasons that people have fear. So public speaking is difficult. So what I'm going to tell you today is not going to specifically address that, but it certainly will address anxiety in general. And anxiety is natural. It's normal, and it serves a protective function. It helps us to, specifically, you guys are in grades, in school, so it helps you study instead of go to the party or whatever because you're anxious that you need to get a good grade. So it can be helpful in many ways. It's just that when you have too much, it can cause a problem. It can help you to avoid something really bad happening, like a bus coming towards you or a bear or something. And all of the things that happen when you're anxious physiologically and in your brain help you to stay safe. So it's a really good thing when we need it. And that's what a lot of people coming to my anxiety classes don't think. They want to get rid of it. They don't want it anymore. They want me to tell them how to make it go away. Well, that's a lot of drugs. That's about the best you can do. And there are a lot of people who take a lot of drugs to try to feel better from anxiety. And medications can be part of the treatment, but it's really a Band-Aid on the problem, and it doesn't really solve the problem. It just puts it off, and it can actually make anxiety worse, like the class of drugs that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. It can actually make anxiety worse in the long run, although in the short run it works wonderfully. Okay. Any questions about that? Pretty good. Got a pretty good idea now of what anxiety is. It includes all the feelings are always fear. It's always fear-based. It's always future-oriented. If you're depressed, depression's more ruminating about the past, whereas anxiety is more worrying about the future, whether it's one moment in the future or 20 years. So it can be based on the past, but it's really your anticipation of what you think might happen. And are you perceiving what is going to happen accurately? And are you perceiving how well you'll cope with it accurately? And when you're anxious, you probably aren't. You're having distorted thoughts, so we'll get into that. So what causes anxiety is the next question on here. We know so much more about anxiety, even than, like I said, when I started in this 8 years ago. We've learned so much because they're doing a lot of neuroscience now and neuroimaging, and we're starting to look at parts of the brain that really look fired up when people are anxious. So there's a whole lot about the physiology of anxiety that I'm not going to go into today, but it's very interesting if you want to pursue that. But what we do know about it is that there is a genetic predisposition for anxiety. So one or both of your parents probably have too much anxiety, whether or not they were diagnosed with some kind of an anxiety disorder, which means you have too much anxiety, basically. And so it's, people say they have nervous breakdowns, for instance, or they're just really nervous, or they're worry warts, or something's going on where they're anxious about it. And so that's part of it, is you have a genetic predisposition for anxiety. The next one is life circumstances. Now that's why I think I'm getting more and more people coming in now. I think it's partly that people are starting to see that there is a treatment for anxiety and it works so well that people used to think they couldn't do anything about it. And now we know they can. So life circumstances, certainly stress in your life. There's a lot of things you can do regarding that that can help you to bring your level of anxiety down. But that it can also raise your level of anxiety depending on what's going on. And stress can be either a present day stress that's just happened, or it can be a lifetime of accumulation of stressors. So people often, when they hit college, or they get married, or they get their first job, or they're trying to get their first job in this market, or they're having kids, things like that, there can be a higher level of anxiety. Although some people have it even when they're young. We think that's the basis of most school phobia. A lot of the problems that kids have when they're young. Biological factors. So lots of physical conditions seem to be made worse by anxiety. Certainly there's a connection between diabetes and anxiety. IBS, GERD, high blood pressure are all definitely related to anxiety. We definitely think fibromyalgia. There's a link particularly between that and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, a lot of people your age don't have those things, but the accumulation of too much anxiety over time, which we're not meant to have. As human beings, society has changed so much that we haven't kept up with it as far as our system is concerned, and that's why it's really important to learn how to manage your anxiety better. Anxiety is meant to be very short-lived. You know, the saber-toothed tiger's coming out of the woods. We have to decide whether they're going to fight him or run away or freeze and play dead, which are the three options people had, and then they're gone. And so the anxiety doesn't totally go away, but it is at least partially gone. Whereas in our society now, especially with computers and texting and emailing and twittering and all these other things now that are going on, we're constantly doing something. And even when you're sleeping, you may not be sleeping soundly because you're not totally calmed down. Because of all of those factors, it is starting to cause more problems with health, which you won't see for 10 or 20 years. Now, I don't want to make you anxious about it, but, and I probably have done that. But I just want to tell you that it's really important. It's not just a mental health concern. We are, again, seeing more. I mean, I've been a yoga instructor, and I've done meditation and all sorts of different kinds of things like that for 30 years now, and I've found it very helpful. But they're starting to see a really strong link more and more that I'm really excited about between the mind-body. And I don't know how much you guys are studying that, but I hope that it's coming up in some of the things that you're studying. There is a very strong mind-body connection. So not only will your anxiety help you to manage it, help you to feel better as far as being more confident in all situations, but it'll also be, you'll be physically healthier. Yes?
I don't understand what you meant when you said there were physical connections and you mentioned diabetes and fibromyalgia. Are these one causes the other as far as anxiety goes? Is that more?
You know, they haven't established a strong causal effect, but they see so much anecdotal evidence that the two do influence each other. So does IBS or GERD or fibromyalgia, is that caused by anxiety or some kind of a post-traumatic stress or something like that? Is there a predisposition? Is it going to make it worse? Probably a combination of those things, but nobody has any really definitive research on that because it's kind of tricky. But they definitely influence each other. Mind-altering substances. Okay, here we go. Alcohol is one of the biggest things, although marijuana certainly is huge in California. But alcohol is one of the biggest things that seem to be something people use to self-medicate for anxiety. Huge, especially social anxiety. It's huge. But marijuana is also, and it can certainly bring your anxiety level down temporarily. But in 24 to 48 hours, a lot of times, for instance, with alcohol, it will increase your anxiety, maybe sooner. And it's only temporary. And it's not real convenient if it's like you're giving a presentation or something. So you may want to learn some other ways to manage it. But then there's also things like caffeine. Caffeine can make your anxiety worse. If you drink too much caffeine, depending on how sensitive you are. Some people could have a couple of cups of coffee a day or sodas, no problem. But some people really can't. And it causes them to have more anxiety. So that's something that you can look at too. And also prescription drugs can sometimes cause too much anxiety. And high expectations. Now that's probably often true of college students. Most college students have higher expectations than the average person. Perfectionism tends to run pretty high in people who are overly anxious. And all people I talk to, and I work with a lot of people who are perfectionists, say, well, I don't expect to be perfect, but pretty darn close. So high expectations can also increase your anxiety. It can be really great, right? It helps you to accomplish wonderful things. It's finding that balance between having high expectations, but not so high that it causes you tremendous distress. So that's what we try to teach in the programs that we teach, is finding that place where you feel like it's the right amount, but it's not overdone, it's not too much. And that's kind of a balance that you have to find. So the symptoms of anxiety run in pretty much 3 different categories. There are physical symptoms. No, I'm not going to, no way I'm going to get through all of this. Physical symptoms, thoughts, and behaviors. So normally when I teach this class, I ask for examples, but for the sake of time, I better just kind of run through this. But please feel free to ask me questions if you want. But physical symptoms of anxiety might be an increased heart rate. You might be shaky. Certainly tension, muscle tension is an issue. You could get dizzy. You could have some nausea or some stomach issues. Something I'm missing here. Tingling in your hands and feet if you're having panic attacks. Panic's a little different. That's like the top of the anxiety where it feels like something's happening right now. So you could have some tingling in your hands and feet. Rarely do you ever pass out from anxiety. It certainly is possible if you have a history of passing out, but one of the biggest fears is that you're going to stand up here and pass out when you're making a presentation, for instance. First of all, you know not to lock your knees, right? You know that one? Okay, you don't lock your knees. And very few people ever pass out. It does happen occasionally, but it's very unlikely. And if you do pass out, that's just your brain trying to equalize the blood in your head. It's trying to actually make you feel better. I'm not sure if that makes you feel better. But it's very unlikely. But all of these things then will lead to, if this is first, sometimes physical symptoms are first, sometimes thoughts are first. Thoughts that you might have. And we call them cognitive distortions because they may be, cognitions of course are thoughts, cognitive distortions, because when you are anxious or depressed or angry or any strong feelings at all, you are very, very likely to not think quite straight. You just are. You think you are, it feels like you are, but when you're not so anxious or angry or sad or depressed or whatever it is, you're going to think differently most of the time. And you've probably already observed that, but if you haven't, this is a good thing to start observing. When you have any kind of strong feelings versus when you're in a calmer state of mind, are you thinking correctly? So a lot of what you will have is some distortions. You may catastrophize or think the worst is going to happen, You may think you're going to go crazy. Lots of people end up in the emergency room and they have panic attacks and think they're having heart attacks, and they're not. They're just panic attacks, which are very uncomfortable. I don't know if any of you have ever had them, but they're very uncomfortable. And they're very common. Millions and millions of people have them several times in a lifetime. And most people, it doesn't turn into what we call panic disorder, but it's very uncomfortable. Or die. And you don't die from anxiety. Now again, in the long run, if you never treat your anxiety, you can start to have increasingly a lot of health problems. But nobody dies from anxiety in the short run. We are built to survive anxiety. In fact, anxiety is supposed to help us, not kill us. So when you feel like you're studying really hard, or you're doing something you're really anxious, or you're giving your presentation, it's supposed to help you, not hurt you, even though it may not feel like it at the time. And let's see, what else did I want to say about that? Behaviors. What you do or you don't do because of your anxiety. So a lot of people do use alcohol or other drugs. A lot of people have safety behaviors that they do, like they check something over and over again, or somebody to make sure they're okay, or what the work they've done is okay, they'll check it and recheck it and recheck it. Things like that can be a behavior issue. A lot of people will avoid situations that they know of that cause them anxiety. And all of these things serve to perpetuate anxiety because you're still afraid of it. And the idea is to stop being afraid of anxiety. It's a normal human function which has kind of gone awry because we have so many things that keep us wound up during the day, but that we can manage much, much better if we learn how to manage all three different areas. And that's what the treatment is for anxiety. It's learning how to manage any physical symptoms you have. A lot of times people have trouble with sleep too. Either can't get to sleep because their minds are racing, or they wake up and they can't get back to sleep. Or they don't feel rested because they're not going into a really deep sleep. A lot of times we see when we measure the brain waves of people who have too much anxiety, they don't go into that deep REM sleep for 2 or 3 hours a night, so they're not really as rested as they could be. And that's also true if you drink alcohol. You go to sleep quicker, but you don't go into deep levels of sleep. It just doesn't help you sleep as well. So a lot of people do have trouble with sleep. Well, this is all as a result of what we call the sympathetic nervous system. Let me give you a little handout on this. I'm just going to read the first one person and then I can send them around. The sympathetic nervous system is the nervous system part of the nervous system that makes your anxiety go up. It releases adrenaline into your system so that you can do whatever it is you need to do, that you think you need to do because of your anxiety. So when it releases this adrenaline into your system, it activates the sympathetic nervous system. And when there's no more danger, what's supposed to happen is the parasympathetic nervous system will calm you back down again. Now that's when it's working really well. And you guys all, I'm sure, have plenty of examples of when you've been anxious, you've problem solved, or you've done something really quickly because it was a real emergency, and then you return to a relatively calm state. If you have, I would say, a healthy amount of anxiety, then that's what you were doing. But sometimes it gets stuck in this anxiety cycle, which is illustrated on this particular sheet here, where the anxiety gets triggered, and it gets triggered in the reacting part of the brain. It's the lower functioning part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that developed first before the prefrontal cortex, which is the last part of the brain to develop and the most sophisticated part of the brain. So the reacting brain is triggers anxiety with your genes, with chemicals, with any stressors that either you place upon yourself or that are placed upon you, or past events, things that happened in the past. And if it functions the way it's supposed to, if you're in imminent danger, you will immediately react. It kind of bypasses the thinking brain. I'm sure that you've probably had this happen if you've had an emergency, where you just do something. And it bypasses the thinking brain temporarily, and it can save lives. You know, it can be very, very important for people. And also, if you have something that you need a problem to solve, From the reacting brain, if it functions the way you want it to, it will go immediately into the thinking brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, or this area of the brain, which is the smart area of the brain, which, by the way, is not totally developed until you're in your early to mid-20s. That's when this is totally developed, when your prefrontal cortex, your decision-making, your executive function of your brain is totally developed. If it becomes a problem, what happens is you get caught in a cycle. So, although it just says fight or flight, there's also the freeze response. When you're anxious, you're either going to fight it, like fight the anxiety, fight the symptoms, fight the thoughts. You know, the behaviors, of course, you're going to do some avoiding. You're going to freeze, which is you don't know what to do. Have you ever been anxious where you just thought, I don't know what to do? You just kind of get stuck in not being able to make a decision. Well, that's very similar to animals in the wild who will actually play dead. And their heart rate actually slows down and they actually are seeming dead so that the predators think that they're dead, and most animals don't like dead meat so that they won't bother them. Or you want to flee, you want to run away. So if you have these symptoms, you don't like them, because they're not meant to be there at that point in time. You're trying to get rid of them. You're going to have some thoughts which are going to, you're going to have to start questioning if you want to get your anxiety under control. And you're going to do something to make the anxiety go away, because you don't like it. So you can get stuck in this cycle. Sometimes it's physical symptoms first, sometimes it's thoughts, sometimes it's actual situations. You know, that's another thing we have people start to look at. What's going on? And then we have them start working in all three of those areas. So that's kind of a very short version of that. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Is there any difference between anxiety and stress?
They're very similar. Very, very similar. There's really, you know, stress is more an acceptable word for, I think, what goes on in daily life, right? But they're really the same thing. They really are. They're just pressure on the system. Anybody else? The treatment for them is pretty much the same, too, in a lot of ways. Okay. All right, that just gives you a general idea of the fight or flight and the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. There's a lot more you can learn about that if you wanted to. So when is it helpful? When does it become a disorder? So basically, this is not a hard and fast answer. It's you have too much, it lasts too long, and it's interfering with the quality of your life. That's when you have too much. So you decide if you have too much, it's lasting too long, or it's interfering with the quality of your life. If it isn't, fine. If it is, there's a lot you could do about it. Now just, man, I really don't have much time. Very briefly, there's different kinds of anxiety disorders, and I just want to mention those very briefly today. A lot of times people will have what we call a panic attack, when it's this huge surge of anxiety, and it really does feel like you're going crazy, you're going to die or something. But it's a surge of adrenaline telling you that you're in imminent danger when you aren't. If there is a bear coming out at you from the woods, and you have a surge of energy, you're not going to think, oh, there's something wrong with me. You're going to think, there's a bear and I need to get out of here. But when it happens without that context, that's when you start to think, what's wrong with me? Something's wrong with me. Something's majorly wrong with me. So many people, like I said, have panic attacks, but it doesn't turn into panic disorder unless you start having them all the time and you start avoiding life because of it. Just ask me if you have any questions, otherwise I'm just going to kind of move through these. Generalized anxiety, you tend to worry too much. Everybody worries. How much is too much? Again, you have to decide. Are you worrying about things other people don't worry about? Or are you worrying about what other people do worry about, but you worry much more than other people? And it causes you a lot of tension or irritability. I forgot to put irritability up here. Or a lack of sleep. Then you might have something called generalized anxiety. And that is also, all of these are treatable. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is classically the one of what? What's the major?
Eating, shopping, I don't know.
Well, those certainly are possible. But the biggest one is the germ thing, right? And washing your hands over and over again, or not touching certain things, those different kinds of things. But it can also, OCD can also be obsessive thinking over and over and over again about something, and it causes you distress. And so that is also very treatable too. Social anxiety disorder is actually the biggest that we think now category of anxiety, and that includes public speaking. But it also includes things like small groups, large groups, even family, people you do know, people you don't know. It can include a lot of different situations. And there's a very great treatment program for that now as well. Specific phobias, the common ones are heights and elevators, closed spaces, blood, different kinds of things like that. Sometimes there's a reason for that. There's a precipitating factor, and sometimes there isn't. You don't know what it is, or you don't know what it is. Either way, we can treat it. And then post-traumatic stress disorder, again, is pretty complicated, and I can't spend much time on it except to say that it's some kind of trauma that happened. Either to you, or you saw it, or somebody talked to you, and it was pretty horrible, and you can be traumatized just by hearing about something. And for most people, they don't develop this disorder when that happens. But for some people, they do, and there are a lot of reasons why it might develop that I'm not going to go into. But if you have nightmares or flashbacks or problems with much too much anxiety, and it seems like you're reliving something bad that happened, there's great treatment for that as well. So those are the different kinds of disorders. What's not an anxiety disorder is if you had something kind of bad happen to you and you're really anxious right now. That's like an adjustment disorder. And that usually passes fairly quickly. Sometimes you talk to a therapist, sometimes you don't need to. But it's not actually an anxiety disorder. It's if it hangs on for a long time that we start looking at how can we intervene to try to help you feel better. So treatments in general, if you really want to get better from anxiety, you can take medications, and doctors are very, very happy to give them to you most of the time. And antidepressants, of course, are used for tamping down anxiety a little bit, even if you don't have any depression. I'm not a medical doctor. But the class of drugs that we try to get people to avoid or use very sparingly are benzodiazepines, which are really big out there now. Xanax and Klonopin, Valium, and Ativan. Those are the big ones that Kaiser prescribes. And doctors get anxious when anxious people come into their office and they give them these. They work great, but they don't really solve the problem. And over time, you can become addicted to them or dependent upon them. Most people don't, but you can. So it's something that you want to use only sparingly, once in a while, if you do use that at all. One of the biggest things is to try to strengthen the parasympathetic nervous system, which is learn how to calm down. And I don't mean a little calm. I mean really learn how to chill. Because most people are at a higher level of anxiety than is really comfortable. Now, there is this whole thing about you like it because it's like speeding and it's cool and it's fun, and it's, especially if you're young. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you don't feel like it's a problem. But if you would like to be able to be totally calm, what you will find is that you will rejuvenate better, you will sleep better, you will think better, because the prefrontal cortex is most online when you are totally relaxed. And so, for example, when you have a problem and you go to sleep at night, but you wake up in the morning and you think of a solution, or you just stop thinking about it for a while and then the answer pops into your head, that's when you're more relaxed. So if you really want to be the best that you can be, sometimes you want to be able to completely relax, even if in general you really like to be stimulated a lot. So relaxation practice is recommended. There's all different kinds of things. They're all over the internet, they're all over CDs, MP3s. You can find all sorts of things. The best thing to do to start is a progressive muscle relaxation, where you tense and you relax different parts of your body. That way you get a muscle memory of the difference between a tense and a relaxed muscle, which you may think you know, but you don't unless you do the contrast. And if it leads you through it, you're less likely to be thinking as you're doing the exercise. So that's what we usually start people with. But there's also things of guided visualizations and things like that that are very helpful for people that we also use. The next piece is cognitive behavioral therapy, and we work all on our thinking. Our thinking determines always how we feel and what we do. Once you realize that you make up a lot of your thinking, and that your thinking really influences a lot of how you feel and what you do or you don't do, this is the key to making changes. That's why a lot of people can't make changes in their lives, is because they try to change their behavior. And that doesn't work as well as actually identifying and changing thinking. Challenging. Identify, challenge, and change thinking. And so we work a lot on this with thought records, and we have different things that we do. And then the third aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy is exposure therapy, which is basically doing things that you're afraid of doing. And we teach you how to do that gradually, although you can certainly do that on your own. But for some people, they need help with doing it more gradually. A lot of people try to do something too quickly, and then they get really anxious and they say, I'm never doing that again. So we teach you how to do that more gradually, and that's the exposure therapy, because you get evidence when you do exposure therapy that it's not as bad as you thought it would be, most of the time. Maybe once in a while it is, but most of the time, your anticipatory anxiety, what happens before you ever go into a situation, is much worse than what actually happens. And you can examine that. You don't have to take my word for it. So we work on that too. We have been doing more and more with something called acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's called ACT, not ACT, but ACT for short. And that is really a combination. Has anybody ever heard of it? Okay, it's kind of new. But it's really a combination of, and you won't like this because people don't, acceptance of anxiety. Really, not just anxiety, but of everything that happens is an acceptance. And a mindfulness of what's going on inside of you and outside of you, and a living in line with whatever you value in life. In other words, doing what you want to do because it's important to you, despite the fact that you have anxiety, like getting up and talking in front of people. It may not be something you want to spend your life doing, but you're going to do it because it's important to whatever you're doing in school right now, despite the fact that you're anxious. So it is something that's becoming more and more research-driven, and I'm including much more in my anxiety classes, is the whole idea of acceptance of anxiety is just being part of who you are and not fighting it so much, because that's what gives it more energy, and that's what makes it worse, is wanting it to be gone. And you can't trick it. You can't pretend like you accept it. You can, but it won't really work. And you really have to be into the acceptance. And that takes some time, and we teach that too, the acceptance of anxiety. Changing anxious behaviors, again, I could say a lot about that, but the main ones are look to see what you're doing right after you have too much anxiety, and whether it's really helpful or whether it's just putting off or being afraid of the anxiety itself, and whether there's a different way you might be able to approach something. So rather than, for instance, a lot of people drink before they go to parties. Rather than do that, we send people to parties and say, you can have a drink, but not until your anxiety level goes down a little bit. To show you that it will go down even if you don't have a drink. So you kind of have to play with that a little bit and see whether your behaviors are helpful to you or they're really perpetuating that anxiety cycle I talked about. And then other things that you can do. I've already talked about the alcohol drugs thing. I've already talked about the caffeine thing. Sleep. How many of you get at least 8 hours of sleep a night? Couple people, not very many though. My experience is, and supposedly according to research, Americans are definitely sleep deprived. You should have 8 to 9 hours at your age to really feel rested. So a lot of people don't get enough sleep. That will help your system rejuvenate. It will also strengthen the parasympathetic nervous system because you'll be able to really be calmer if you have enough rest and you've rejuvenated the whole system better. course, exercise, you know, anxiety causes restless energy. So of course, exercise is very helpful. Eating well, avoiding rushing. Now this one is really interesting. Think about how much during the day that you rush. You get up 15 minutes later and then you have to rush to get ready into class or whatever, rather than getting up and having a few extra minutes. So the tone you set can also lower your stress level, as well as your anxiety level, and you probably end up getting more done, or certainly as much done as you would have, and you'll feel better about it. Plus you'll remember it better. A lot of times people are rushing so much they don't remember where they left their keys or whatever, and those kinds of things. You're not being mindful. So notice if you can slow down a little bit. That will also help your anxiety. Limit how much you watch or listen to excess negative news. It's certainly going 24/7 now with CNN. You know, if you listen to it 24/7, you're not going to be less anxious, I guarantee you. So decide how much is enough. And then say, okay, that is enough for me for today. I've got other things to do. Scheduling daily worry time. This is also a possibility, and it works really well for some people. When during the day you have something that you're kind of bugging you, not just a one-time thing, it's kind of bugging you, you can jot down what it is you're worried about, and then sometime later on in the day, you actually spend 15 to 30 minutes going through this list and worrying about maybe just one thing. Or maybe looking at the list and thinking, well, what's the most important thing I need to think about? And sometimes you can kind of rein it in to a smaller period of your lifetime if you can put it aside until this designated period of time. When you're not texting, talking on the phone, watching TV, all of these other things. You're just focusing on the worry. And so sometimes people are able to really bring that whole thinking brain to the process because they're paying their total attention to it. And then sometimes they get to that place in the day and they go, wait a minute, why did I worry about that? And they don't worry about it. And so they've not wasted time worrying about something they don't need to. Yeah.
I have a question. I was wondering if you could invite, let's say that you have a presentation coming up and you're really stressed out about it, and you try to approach it with the worry time thing. You try to think about it. You try to make yourself realize that you really don't have to worry about it that much. How to balance that with the anticipation reaction, which is another reason for anxiety before public presentations, because there is such a thing as anticipation reaction where you build yourself up basically.
Absolutely.
And you're so stressed out that you have a presentation coming up that you think this is going to happen and this is, and you build this. How do you balance those two? How do you, because for some people it's better not to think about it. I don't want to think about it. I'm just going to get there, I'm just going to get it done. Which one would you say is more useful or better, or how to, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I
How
can
to
say
choose one.
a number of things about that. First of all, if you're going to give a presentation, just to go in there and wing it is not usually a good idea. So you have to prepare, right? How much preparation is too much? I don't know. You can over-prepare. I'm sure you guys all know that. So you prepare. You tell yourself when you have these cognitive distortions, I'm going to do awful, I'm going to make a mess of myself, I'm going to make a fool of myself. That's a big one. Or I'm going to not know what to say, or I'm going to lose my place, or whatever. And then you answer those what ifs. Don't just let those what ifs hang out there. Well, so what? If I lose my place, I'll look at my paper. Or I'll laugh, and everybody else will probably feel for me because they are not doing it right now and they understand how that feels. We've done things with people with public speaking, like blown a fan on all of their notes and they went flying across the room for them. And then they just, that nothing worse could happen to them. And then they picked them up and put it back in order and went on with their speech. And from that time on, that was very effective for them to not worry about it so much. Get a good night's sleep. You know, get some exercise so that your restless energy is kind of calmed down a little bit, and then go in with the thought that you will not be perfect, no matter what. And people don't like you when you're perfect anyway, because they're not going to be perfect. So it's good if you make a mistake or two, because then people like it. You talk a little bit better, right? But you'll probably do a pretty good job. And if you don't, the meaning you attach to the event, which I haven't even touched on today, is huge. What if you don't? What if you stumble around a little bit on your words, or you forget to say something that you really wanted to say, or whatever? What does that say about you? Just doesn't say say anything that you're a bad person or that you're stupid or whatever names we call ourselves, but we never call anybody else. It just says that maybe you forgot something, or you didn't do as well as you'd like to have done. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but you know, a lot of it has to do with balancing preparation with challenging and then answering with thinking, and then you're taking good care of yourself beforehand, and then letting go of it having to be perfect. Okay? Yoga and Tai Chi, Qigong, any of those things are very, very helpful for quieting down the nervous system. I'm not talking about power yoga or hot yoga here. Those are certainly cool ways to do yoga, but not specifically for anxiety. I'm talking about the stretches. I'm talking about holding poses. Generally speaking, yoga poses that put you into a forward bend tend to relax you, and the backward bends tend to energize you. So that's the kind of yoga or Tai Chi that you would do that would be very helpful for anxiety. You can certainly try mindfulness or meditation practice or mindfulness meditation practice. Those things will help you in innumerable ways, not only with anxiety, but with concentration and focus and all sorts of different things. And you can always go to psychiatry now. Davis doesn't have a psychiatry for Kaiser, but I'm sure there's some psychiatry here. But you can go to a psychiatry department and get help with through a therapist or through a doc. Docs usually just prescribe meds, at least at Kaiser. Or you can come in and come to classes. I don't know if UCB has any classes on anxiety, but the programs are really similar. They pretty much follow the kind of format that I've presented to you today. And then I've given you, I've given you just a few books. I certainly use so many more books than this, but this is just a basic list. If you Google anxiety on the internet, you're going to find hundreds of sites. But there's some general ones about the anxious brain. It's a good book if you want to know physiologically what's going on. Dan Siegel, too, has done some things like the mindful brain and Mind Side, a couple of other ones that are very interesting about the brain. Habit Change Workbook is really for changing any habits, and it's just a really good book for that. The book I use the most for generalized anxiety problems is Mastery of Your Anxiety and Worry. The book we use in the OCD class is the next one, the OCD workbook, and we use the book Brain Lock too for that. Lots of good books on social anxiety, but the next two are the ones that we use when we teach the social anxiety classes. Panic, the best book that I have ever seen so far, is this particular one, Mastery of Your Anxiety and Panic. And all these books you can get at bookstores or online. Agoraphobia is the fear of, actually it's in Greek, it's a fear of open spaces, but it's a fear of doing things. So if you have a severe case of agoraphobia, you don't even leave the house. Maybe you heard of people who did that. But certainly people who avoid a lot of things might have something called agoraphobia. I included this next one because we have such a high number of motor vehicle accidents in this area. Maybe not in Davis, but in Sacramento we do. And I see lots and lots of people who come in for this. And I try trauma therapy with them called EMDR, but you can also use this particular book if you want to work on this yourself if you had a motor vehicle accident. And then there's a couple books on PTSD. So any questions? Or comments or thoughts? Or? Yes?
Do you talk to healthcare providers who are really used to just prescribing drugs? Do you have a way to make that approach to get them to not have that reaction of, oh no, I'm just taking this good drug as the hospital?
We're working on it. Doctors go to school for a lot just for medications, right? And they know a lot of things, and I'm not dissing doctors, but they sometimes don't keep up with the current research. And the current research does not indicate benzodiazepines for anything but severe anxiety conditions where people cannot get out of their houses. So the psychiatrists are pretty much on board now. We've been working on them a long time, but the primary care docs and the other docs are not yet. And if you go to an ER with anxiety, they're going to give you some Ativan and Xanax, and they just really want you out of there and be happy, and do it in 10 minutes for most people. So just realize that's a temporary fix. It's not that it's bad, it's just a temporary fix. And we're working on it. Anything else? Yes.
If we wanted to talk to you further, you want to say?
I could stay a few minutes.
Okay.
I'm seeing somebody at 3, so I could probably
Okay.
stay about 15 minutes or so.
Right.
Everybody else just wants to go, right?
How about people who don't have, and it's kind of like, they don't have anxiety, what Margaret mentioned, that, or that surge that you need to get prepared to do something, and it comes kind of later, you know, there is a delay in getting anxious, and,
Yeah.
you
That's a
know,
motivational issue. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like that's a motivational issue. If you know you have a presentation, for instance, and you just can't get motivated to do it until the last minute, and then you're panicked, that's an issue to me. Is that what you
or,
mean?
no, it's,
Okay.
you do your, you know, you prepare your presentation and you think that, but you're so relaxed that, okay, I'm gonna do it and everything's okay, you know, you don't feel any, at all stress or anything, but you're so relaxed that you're even scare yourself out, you know, and then you go there and then it hits you there.
Something else is going on. If you're so relaxed that you're not able to do what you need to do to get ready for something, there's something else going on. If you're really relaxed because you're prepared and you aren't trying to do the perfect job and you know you'll do the best you can, which we do, then maybe it's not a bad thing. I'm still not sure an answer.
Yeah. It's just basically lack of, I think it's more related to that you're too relaxed and you don't have that anxiety.
And it's a problem.
And I question it, you know, why I'm more relaxed than other people, why everybody anxious and I'm not.
Some people are less anxious than others. It doesn't necessarily mean that's a problem. It could be a good thing. That's why I'm trying to say, is it a problem for you to be relaxed?
The problem is,
I'm so sorry, but for those of you who have other classes or have stuff going on, I just want to, I know you're going to be able to answer like maybe
Sure.
more questions for 15 minutes, but I just don't want those of you who absolutely have to
So
go
go.
feel bad.
There you go.
I'm really sorry, I just want to, because I know people have other classes.
Yeah,
and stuff, and I
absolutely.
wanna-
That's why I wanted to finish.
Thank you so much, and thank you for staying these few extra minutes. So if you guys have any more questions, please stay, but if you have to go, feel bad about it.
yes, not always a problem, but sometimes you feel so relaxed that you don't feel more than whatever. Then there's a problem. I feel that
After it's already started.
At that point, then it should be
Okay, you did last time.
Yeah, but I did.
It's okay, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
Screen. Who's your major professor?
Probably going to happen. And when you do, it may stop. That's the
problems is happening.
So then,
I'm working in liquid now. It kind of epigenetic. And I don't think if you know him, he's David Smith. He's the director of the gene timing center.
But my hope is that we
Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I like
Anxious words. And a lot of times, really trying to get out underneath that.
Yeah, I would like to work in a model including the
And
predictors
then
of the
challenge it.
genes.
And then if you can't do it, still not to
That's good.
the.
And you kind of lump stuff, A's, sex, other stuff that you usually put in the model. I put the genes. Yeah, we need some values. We need some quantitative values instead of the model. Yeah, I
And it's
like
funny because it's so biological, like, I was almost compelled to go to when you're just figure it out. We're meant to read diagram, is the way babies read, is the way we read when we're totally relaxed. But when you're anxious, you're not reading diagram, you're either holding your breath or you're just reading, which creates more adrenaline, which makes you think you need more air, which causes you to be more anxious. So the best thing you can do is notice the soft your belly and then the belly.
But we'll have extra time set aside for you guys to do your presentation.
Okay, because what's happening now is there's to just look speak yourself hyperventilating. And I'm reading like really slowly.
Yes.
So what probably
So I was
doesn't
just
happen
wondering
when you get together.
what
you do
that
in my
entails,
room,
and that's probably something you're
probably
working on.
Well, and there's a trick to that too, is what people usually do when they start hyperventilating is they think they don't have enough air, so they
The
start
second
gasping for air, which makes it worse, and
presenting
releases
your
more adrenaline. So the
presentation.
best thing you can do
Non-academic
is to try to
writing.
exhale.
And for that, we actually don't have enough time for everybody to kind of help event, so we're scheduling another period anyway.
Fuller.
So we can just come to that one.
Instead of gas for breath, which is to take another inhalation.
And then
Focus
for the
on
third one,
exhaling.
we're scheduling an extra time for that as
And
well.
then you'll naturally
Our final.
inhale.
So we're basically having, I think, 5 periods of presentation, because it's a longer
That's
period.
what this
And just because we have so many students, we
Okay,
don't
all right.
have time to do it. So same thing for that one, you can just come to the meeting and do your presentation, and you'll have the same experience. Good.
That's great. I was worried after I read the sequences.
more than that.
Yeah. That's great.
Where you put it off and then you do it, yes, and sometimes people are addicted to that rush they get.
Yeah, and I should, once I get it up,
They actually get really into it, that's sometimes.
Yeah, and then, Smart Site, we're gonna be using a lot of like posting readings and stuff.
To that feeling you get it, okay,
You saw.
this is it, it's time to do it, and there's a rush you get, thinking, I gotta get this done now.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be bad habit,
It was just a recommended book.
but it's not helpful if you do it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes you have to change the habit, but change the thinking first.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what you have to work on.
Yeah, Barbara has her.
No, I have the habit of doing this.
I have it on my roster, yes, yes.
I don't want to make it like that. Maybe you don't know much, you could.
There's a sequence that related. Oh, you're good? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, then you beat yourself up.
Yep.
So it's creating a new habit.
And remember, next Thursday is the first presentation. Make sure you read the syllabus.
Or, because the parents will get you that.
Yeah, it's just 3 minutes, very briefly, just basically what you guys do on the first class, and then everybody start first, and then go into this.
And then you see the end results of it. If you're not as anxious, then you do a better job.
The one thing I want you to remember
That was
is
really sad.
And then the rewards will start to pay back.
if you want to read it for yourself, somebody who's not,
Change the habit. And
Break it down.
change
Change
biological.
together.
it's basically better than reading the last one, the first 90 seconds, because then you're.
So see what you're thinking.
And then, that's what we could do.
Usually time tonight.
Absolutely.
Anywhere, whenever.
My office hours aren't published, but I'm free for 2 hours hours
Stay
after this
visit.
class every week. So sometimes maybe can't do it.
It'll be a little late on the quarter, but we'll definitely thank you, that's great.
Yeah.
This is very helpful.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then you have to change the assumption first.